Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you. We're very pleased to welcome you to our afternoon session, and I am honored to introduce Will Richardson to you. He has landed the uninviable first talk in the afternoon shift, and I can't think of any better person to shake you off your post-lunch slumber than Will. You can read his extensive resume on the program. He has been an educator, and he has become a leading thinker and advocate for change, the badly needed change in education at this time, coming from a very long experience in education, and after having spoken with him several times and having heard him speak, I think he adds a lot of value to what he says here on stage, to his experience as an educator and also his experience as the father of two teenagers whom he's trying to guide into the same changes I'm sure he will share with you. He is the author, most recently, of Why School? How Education Must Change When Learning and Information Are Everywhere. I wanted to get the name straight. It is a wonderful book. It is a great thought-provoking book that you can download on any ebook platform. It is published by TED. His TED Talk at Melbourne TEDx has been a great success, and again, a very provocative talk. And it is one of the objectives of our conference, not only to learn about best practice, which of course is part of what he's going to say, but also to get us thinking into a different mindset, to try to lead us into a greater sense of awareness of the changes that we should start to think about and start implementing and leading in our schools. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Will Richardson.
Thank you. So it's really hard to go third, number one. It's really hard to go right after lunch, number two. And number three, it's really hard to go when you're in a hotel where any minute now there may be thousands of happy Japanese people running down the hallways, just interrupting everything I have to say. So maybe we could close the doors and see if that happens or not. It's great to be with you, sincerely, and it's great to have an hour to just talk a little bit about how the world is changing in some pretty big ways, I think, and to build on some of Sagata's ideas and to build on some of Guy's ideas. I told them both I was sitting in the back working on my presentation, deleting slides and adding slides, trying to make sure that what I was about to present would add to what they were talking about, and hopefully that's what we'll be able to do today. How many of you have a device right now that you could connect to the internet and begin to use during this presentation? Okay, so I'm going to invite you guys to do that. I want you to get your stuff out. I want you to go online. I want you to go to this address. How many of you have ever done a back channel conversation before? So 2 or 3 of you. So what you're going to find here at this address is a chat room, basically. And you'll be able to get in there and talk to other people in the audience while I'm presenting. And I'm going to invite you to do that. I'm not going to take any offense if you are nose deep in your computers. I want to kind of model some of the technologies that we're talking about here today, and this is one way of doing it. And I do this for a couple of reasons. Number one, because it is a model, and it does suggest at least some of the ways that we can begin to connect with one another. But I also do it because I learn a great deal from the comments and the questions and the links that people put in this chat when I go back to read it a little bit later. So if you go to that address, you'll see, I'll try to bring it up here, you'll see a website. Oh, that's not it. Hold on. There we go. You should see this website, and basically when you put something in here, you just type your name in. You'll put your name in first, but then just type your name in here, and you click Say, and it should update automatically. Has anyone gotten in there yet? Have you tried it? Did it work? Okay, so I might need to refresh it here a little bit. So I don't know if it refreshes automatically or not. We'll give it a shot here. Let's see. And the danger of this is that we don't know how much bandwidth is in this room, so it may get a little bit tired all of a sudden and not work real well. So that might be a problem. But we'll give it a shot. Is it working for you guys? It is. All right. So maybe it's just not working for me, which is, yeah, there we go. Technology, what do you know? Well, if it's working for you, use it. If it works literally for you, the technology, please feel free to use that. It should look something like this, where you just put your name in and you click join, and then you can add comments. And then basically, if you add comments in there, you can just use that message box. Use it if you like or not. I know a lot of people get kind of distracted by the multitasking aspect of that. And if it doesn't work for you, then don't do it. That's fine. But if you do find that it's kind of interesting, please feel free to use that space, and we'll see what it looks like at the end. So I want to start with this quote by one of my favorite authors, Margaret Wheatley. And she says, "We can't be creative if we refuse to be confused." How many of you are confused by the morning sessions? Any of you confused? Okay, so I'm hoping that every hand's going to go up after my session, all right? My job is to make you confused this afternoon. I really want to try to push your thinking and to get you to ask questions that maybe you're not asking right now. And I think that she's right. Change always starts with confusion. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to model what Guy did and get you a little bit interactive here. I want you to turn to someone next to you right now and just talk about what questions do you have about learning with technology right now. What are some of the questions that are confusing you right now? And I'll give you about a minute to do that. And then I just want to hear what some of those questions are. So go ahead and talk to one another. What's confusing you about technology and education? Okay, if you could bring those conversations to a close. So, just before we get to some of that conversation, today's meet is working now. You can see kind of what's happening here. I'm going to urge you to put those questions in there. I do want to know, the first person to post was Dan Warner. Where's Dan? Dan, you win the iPad. Nice job. No, I'm just kidding. There is no iPad, but I thought... You can see that people are in here talking, and some of you are kind of just introducing yourselves. Looks like we have about 30 or 40 people in here. Look, you're going to have to self-police yourselves in here, okay? I know there's a tendency to kind of, get outside of the lines a little bit, and that's okay. But make sure that what happens in there is useful. So, what are you confused about? What's a question that came up in terms of learning with technology that you asked? Anyone? Yep. Yep. Right. So basically, how do we do this in primary schools where certainly the emphasis is reading and writing, just getting that literacy down? And then what happens in high school when a lot of the exams that they have to take is basically, handwriting and things like that? So there are some questions around that. A couple others? What else were you talking about, or what questions did you ask? Yep. How do you know which apps to use? Is that right? Or are all of them, or whatever else? What's out there? What works? Whenever you learn one, there's about 20 more to learn, and whatever else. Yep. One more. Yep. Is it a tool or a foundation? What a great question, and that's something that we should probably be asking more. I'll take one more. Yep. How to take the technological side out of technology? That's an interesting question. What happens if it doesn't work, right? Like it did a couple minutes ago, and I was standing here going, oh, please begin to work, right? Okay, so these are great. And I like to say that if you're not feeling confused about education and your roles as educators right now, you haven't been paying attention, basically. Because there are things happening with technology that, as certainly as Sugata was talking about, that are changing the ways that we need to think about what that learning interaction looks like. So I'm going to show you basically where most of my confusion comes from. These are my kids. And I was saying last night, and it's true, this is one of 6 pictures that my wife and I have of my kids being happy at the same time. It's a wonderful thing. Every time we see them both smiling, we get out our cameras and we start taking pictures. My son Tucker is 14, my daughter Tess is 16. They're actually both in the same school where I taught for 22 years. They're going to that high school right now. And I want to say this, and I want to make sure you hear me say it in the way that it's meant, that I'm saying it. I'm not a happy public school parent right now because of the experience that my kids are having in their schools. And it's not about the people in the room. It's sincerely not. Many of them are my friends, by the way, and we have conversations about what's happening in their classrooms. But it's about the system that they're in that doesn't allow those teachers to really think very differently about what's happening in schools. And, one confusion that I have that I think is pretty, I don't know if it's typical or not, but I don't know why school is the only place in their lives where they can't take the technologies out of their pockets to answer the questions that they're being asked. I don't understand that. I'm a big advocate of open phone tests. Why would we ask questions on tests that can be answered by taking your phone out and looking up the answer? And if we're going to ask those questions, why wouldn't we let kids use their phones? Because if you ask them that outside of school, that's exactly what they would do. If I asked you right now, what was the cause of the demise of the Gupta Empire? Sugata may know, but how many of you know? No, but if I said there is an iPad for the first person who can answer that question, what would you do? You'd be on here right away. Now, the reason I asked that particular question is in my country, which, by the way, may be the most dysfunctional country in the world when it comes to education right now, sincerely. In my country, in New York State juniors had to be able to answer that question to pass the New York State's Regents test. And the question that I ask is, why? Why do they need to know that little tidbit of information? And if we're going to ask them that information, why aren't we letting them take their technology out to answer that question? So those are some of the confusions I have as a parent. This is a very confusing time when I look at the experiences that my kids are having inside the classroom as opposed to the learning experiences they're having outside the classroom. And let me just say this too. My kids are privileged. They are absolutely privileged. They have lots of access. And I know that there are lots of kids in this world that don't have access. And certainly, Sugata talked about many of them, and that, to me, is almost a moral issue at this point. I can't imagine that kids with access that know how to use it, I don't know how the kids who don't have it are going to be able to compete with those kids. And so I want to acknowledge that and say that and make sure you understand, certainly, that my kids have a lot of access. But still, those are the types of questions that I'm asking. So who am I? Just to let you know, I am a teacher that started blogging with my kids in 2001, 12 years ago, when basically blogs were something that hardly anybody knew what they were. There were literally 6 or 7 people who I was talking to in education that were trying to figure out, well, what do these social media tools look like in classrooms and what do they mean for learning? I'm also a blogger of my own, where I have written, probably with some bad math, at least 1.5 million words in the last 13 years. And this, and I'm a little bit timid about saying this since my wife is here, but this, aside from having kids, has been the most transformative thing in my life. No offense, but because this has been what's connected me to other people around the world who share my passions and who want to learn with me in ways that are impossible in my physical space. And this is what has changed the way that I think about learning and education in just about every way. I'm on Twitter. How many of you have a Twitter account that you use on a regular basis? Okay, so maybe about 10% of you. And how many of you are tweeting right now? Okay, great. Be careful what I say. Feel free to tweet if you like. But my Twitter network is, again, a group of people that I interact with on a fairly regular basis that teaches me a great deal, that allows me learning opportunities that I think are pretty profound, and that is my network. This is a representation of my network. This is from LinkedIn. And this kind of gives you a sense of what my learning life looks like. And almost no one that you see up on that page is in my face-to-face world. 99% of those little tiny dots that are represented up there represent people who are outside of my where I live. Most people who I will never meet, most people who are absolute strangers in my life, except for the fact that we connect around the things we care about and the things we want to learn. That is a powerful place to be, I will tell you. And because of those types of experiences, because I consider myself to be a network learner, I have some pretty, I think, outspoken views on what this moment means for us. Number one, I think this may be the most disruptive moment ever in education. I can't imagine that there's been a moment when more things have been happening that push against the traditional ways that we think about teaching and learning in classrooms. And you've heard some of them here this morning, obviously. But I also think that there has probably never been a more amazing time to be a learner. It is amazing. If you have a passion right now, and you want to learn something, and you have the wherewithal, the literacies perhaps, to connect to other people around the world who share those passions, who want to make stuff and create things and collaborate with you, it's amazing. It really is. And I look at my kids with envy on a regular basis, thinking about the opportunities that they have that I didn't have when I was growing up. Pretty much my learning took place in that face-to-face world. I really believe schools are the most important places in our communities. I believe that, especially, not just especially in my country, but in all places, that schools provide a fabric for our communities that is irreplaceable. And the last thing that I want you to hear is the suggestion that I want schools to go away. I don't want schools to go away at all. But I don't necessarily want schools to be better any longer. I want schools to be different. I want what happens in those places to be decidedly different from simply trying to raise the needle on whatever assessment or valuation we have on schools, to change the way that we think about what happens in classrooms, not simply kind of make it better. And I understand, as Guy suggests, that those aren't mutually exclusive. I understand that. But I think that the thinking right now has to be more on how do we do this thing differently. And here's the biggest problem right now. I think for most of us in this room, and I'm not going to make... I may be making an assumption that isn't correct. But I think for most of us in this room, our own ability to use computers to make things and to solve problems with technology, and our own ability to connect to other people to learn, is dangerously inadequate right now. And the reason that I say that is because if we don't have a context for the use of technology in our own learning, it's very difficult to make decisions about what happens in schools and classrooms with kids that are relevant and really help our kids manage the type of learning environment that they're in. So this, I think, is the really interesting position that we find ourselves in. This world is not what most of you signed up for when you went into education. This is not what traditional schools are built for. And so our job right now is to figure this out, this big question: what changes in a world where we can connect and create and work with other people in a learning context in such profoundly different ways from most of the experiences we had when we were in school. And our own narratives, in many ways, prevent us from seeing those opportunities. So I'll give you some examples, just some couple quick examples. This is a group of kids who had just got tired of being bullied in school. They had been people were calling them names and online and whatever else. So they got together and they created this website called We Stop Hate. And it's a pretty interesting site. They've got a blog, they have all sorts of resources. But not only did they create a website, which today is not really a big deal, right? That's not really a complex task with computers any longer. You can create a website in literally 5 minutes. But what they did that was interesting was now they've also built a community around that. And they've begun to connect kids from around the world who shared those experiences and who wanted that support and who wanted to connect and talk about that stuff and figure out ways that they could make a difference in their own schools. And now all of a sudden there are kind of schools, different clubs called We Stop Hate, and different groups that are getting together in their face-to-face worlds and then connecting in the online world. And it's really changed things. And the cool thing about it is it's kids. It's kids who are creating these sites because they have a desire or a passion or a need or a problem to solve. and they're using the technology to connect. And this has nothing to do with school, by the way. This is not a school assignment or a project or anything. This is just kids with access who want to do something good in the world, have an authentic purpose, and they're doing it. And just one other quick example, Super Awesome Sylvia. Have any of you ever seen a Super Awesome Sylvia video on YouTube? If you haven't, you need to go and see Super Awesome Sylvia. She's pretty much of a geek. You can see she's got a huge YouTube following. Her videos actually landed her in the White House to show President Obama one of her big experiments. She blows stuff up. She just tries stuff and builds things. And I've learned a great deal about how to use technology from watching some of her videos. They're pretty cool. So Sylvia came up with this problem that she wanted to solve. And she said, I love to watercolor, but what I'd really love to be able to do is, if I make a beautiful watercolor, I'd like to be able to copy it. But I don't want to just put it on a copying machine. I want another watercolor that looks exactly like it. So she said, maybe we could create some type of robot that would kind of create a copy. And so a couple of adults got wind of this, and they started working with her. So do you know what Kickstarter is? I don't know if you've seen that, but it's a site now, and I'm sure there's something similar here, where if you have a great idea, you can go to Kickstarter and put it up there, and then you make a little video, and you say, I need $20,000, or I need this amount of money. If you want to support me, can you give me $20, etc.? So people just pitch in money. She went on Kickstarter with her two friends, and they asked for $50,000, and within a month, they had almost $90,000 that they had raised so that she can create this robot in kit form. How cool is this? So you'll be able to buy the kit and bring it home and put it together and then start replicating your watercolors or doing that in classrooms or whatever else. I just think that's really cool. It's the ability to take technology to solve problems and to share it out in ways that are pretty different from what we could do before. So I could give you many more of those, but I don't have time. And so, it is a big change moment that we're seeing. When kids can begin to do that type of work on their own without us, that's a pretty big change moment. And it's requiring us to rethink a lot of what we do. So here's the difference. In the last 15 years, we've gone from a world of basic scarcity of information, knowledge, content, and teachers. You used to have to go to some place in order to get the knowledge, go to school or libraries or whatever else, to this world of abundance now. It is everywhere. Basically, if you have access and you know what to do with it, there are just reams of information out there. There are billions potential teachers out there for you to help you learn whatever it is you want to learn. And this abundance thing gets overwhelming. I get it. Next year, they're estimating that 1 billion photos a day will be uploaded to the internet. 1 billion photos a day. And my kids will take about 20,000 of those. I get it. And many of your kids will take a lot of those as well. But when you look at this list, it's an amazing thing. 5 billion people would be online by the end of this decade. And that's a huge number. And that's a significant, significant shift in terms of, again, our ability to learn things. The kind of interesting thing that's happening now is this thing called the Internet of Things. I don't know if you've heard this, but you've probably heard that refrigerators will be able to send you an email in the near future saying, hey, you're out of milk, or pick up some butter. And here's one, I think, that you can buy online right now. This is a little box. It's $99. You take it home, and you can program it online. And so you put it on your dryer, and basically when your dryer stops shaking, it sends you an email, your clothes are dry. Or you put it down in your basement, and you get a text, hey, dummy, your basement's flooding, come home fast, whatever it is. But we're going to be wearing these types of connection points, and there are good things and bad things about this. Right now in the States, we're having a huge, huge discussion about privacy, about, do we want people to know this much about us? Do we want people to have this type of information? 3D printing, I don't know if you've seen 3D printers. This is a big thing that's happening right now with the maker movement, it's called. It's this idea that, if you break a screw on a cabinet or something, you don't have to go to the local hardware store anymore. You just bring up the parts number and you type it in, and it prints out the screw on your printer, and you just screw the cabinet back in. And these are now, that one you're looking at there, I think is $2,000, which is still pretty expensive, but there are 3D printers now that are under $1,000, and they're getting cheaper by the day, and there's some really interesting things that are happening with that. And by the way, they think they're going to be able to print food at some point. That's not printed beef, by the way, sorry. And especially, I probably shouldn't show this to this audience where, we're vegetarians. So this has been an interesting trip down to Argentina with everybody eating beef all over the place. But NASA, the space agency, is thinking we want to send people to Mars. That's a whole bunch of food that they're going to have to put somewhere. What if we were able to print some of that? What if we were able to somehow, and they think they can do that. So those types of changes are pretty extreme. And, you talked about apps. Someone mentioned the question about apps. There's no way, even collectively in this room, that we have our brains around all these different tools for all these different purposes. And by the way, this graphic is obsolete the date that it's printed. There are new tools coming online every day, old tools. How do you figure that stuff out? How do you make sense of that? That's a huge question. And I'll give you the short answer. You need a good network. You need a good network right now in order to help you figure out, well, which ones of these tools are most relevant for what I'm trying to do? Which ones work? Which ones don't work? So it is overwhelming, this abundance thing. And by the way, this change is not optional. It is not something we can simply close our doors to and say, yeah, I'll worry about that next year. This is not some type of fad, this thing we call the internet. It's not going away. It's just going to get bigger and faster. And it does bring up this description, which I love, from Michael Wesch. We really do now live in a world marked by ubiquitous computing, ubiquitous information, ubiquitous networks at unlimited speed about everything, everywhere, from anywhere, and all kinds of devices that make it ridiculously easy to connect, organize, share, collect, collaborate, and publish, and learn. And learn. And that's an important one as well. And does that look like school? Raise your hand if that would describe your school. Yeah, not so much. But it does describe outside of school for lots of kids and for lots of us. I mean, many of us live in that world, don't we, when we leave school? It's a pretty interesting distinction that's starting to happen. You look outside of education, certainly, how many of you have a phone with a camera in it? You're all journalists right now. Congratulations, right? So when you see those happy, screaming Japanese people running down the hall, you could be out there taking pictures of them and putting them up on Twitter or Instagram or wherever else. You could be reporting the news as it happens. And you see that every single day. You hear about things that are happening in the Middle East, the Arab Spring, and all of that is, not all of it, but a significant portion of that was people taking pictures and posting them around the world and getting support and sharing information in ways that were pretty profound. If you're a publisher right now, I don't know how you sleep well at night. 30% of all the books sold on the Amazon Kindle now are self-published, 30%. And they think that number is going to be probably about 50% in the next few years. Here's David Mamet, Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright, who says, I'm not going to publish any longer, I'm just going to self-publish. I'm going to put my own works out there, and I'm going to market them, and I'm going to license them, and I don't need that middleman any longer. So that's pretty huge. Medicine is changing. You talk about that 3D printer. This was a story from a couple months ago where this child needed a very small little tracheal tube here to help him breathe. And so the doctors actually kind of sketched it out, went and put it on a CAD program, printed it on a 3D printer next door using biodegradable materials that they then inserted into the child's throat, and now the child's cells have grown around it, and that tube is just kind of dissolved away. So that type of medical advance is starting to happen more and more as well. Now, here's where we find ourselves in education. And this is where that discomfort, that confusion kind of stems from. Most of us right now still have this kind of traditional learning context. And it is this idea that school is basically here to deliver an education to you. That, this is what it looks like. We go from, in your case, you go from, February to December? Is that right, when school is, pretty much? In our case, it's September to June. That we go from 8 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. That we have, different disciplines that we take, different classes that we have to take. That whole thing. I mean, we could, if I asked you all, draw a picture of school right now. It's like what Sagata said in his first slide, or showed in his first slide. That picture of school, we kind of all feel like that's what school is about. But now, basically, we have this modern learning context. And I'm not calling, I refuse to call it 21st century any longer. We're 14 years into it. Let's get over the 21st century thing. Let's just call it something else. Modern learning, if you will. And in that modern learning context, you have a lot of kids. You have a lot of people like me who are not waiting for a particular curriculum, are not waiting for a particular day in order to study something or to learn something. We want to learn something, we go learn it. And we can learn it in some ways, for some things, just as deeply as we can in traditional systems. I'm not here to tell you that I want my physician to be trained on YouTube. That's not the point here, right? We want certain people, certain professions, certain occupations to be traditionally trained. So there's still that very important role that plays. But in a lot of ways now, modern learning is becoming what most people who have connections do. It's the difference between delivery. My kids go into school and wait to be told what to learn, when to learn it, how to learn it, every single day, just about. It's the difference between that and discovery. My son wanted to learn Minecraft. Any Minecraft parents in the audience? We maybe can have a drink later on today as some support. My son wanted to learn Minecraft, and basically he didn't wait for the textbook. He didn't wait to be assigned, someone to tell him, go home and try to make a tree, and then we'll take the tree and look at the rubric tomorrow and see how the tree is. And, if you want to make a chest, you can't make a chest because that doesn't come up until week 3, so don't do that. He just went home and learned it. And he had a network of kids that he connected to, and he watched YouTube videos, and he's a self-organized learner in some pretty powerful ways. It's what you want me to learn versus what I want to learn. It's time and place. I need to do this now and here rather than anytime, anywhere, with anyone. And it's also just in case, and this guy kind of talked about this, just in case I need to know the Pythagorean theorem at some point in my life. I'm going to learn it when I'm in 7th grade. But, if I said to him, too, at lunch, I said, I'd love to give you all the algebra test right now and see how many of you would pass it, because I'm sure you would struggle, many of you would struggle just like I would. I wouldn't pass it. I wouldn't be able to pass that test right now, versus just in time. Now, I get it that I need to know the Pythagorean theorem. I understand that. And I'm not saying we throw all content out. Don't hear me say that either. But I am saying in a world of abundance, we have to have a conversation is, what does every child need to know? What does every child really need to read Shakespeare? I know, let's not go there, right? I know. But you know what I'm saying? I think that we have to put those things on the table and ask ourselves, in a world where Shakespeare's everywhere, why do we give kids Shakespeare? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. So here's the key shift. In just about all parts, in the way we think about our worlds right now, we are moving away from this institutionally organized kind of environment into this self-organized world. And this is, again, what Sagata talks a lot about. It's this idea that we can basically book our own travel now. We don't need travel agents any longer. We can buy our own stock. We can publish our own books. We can, do a lot of the things that we needed someone or something to do for us before. We don't need those entities any longer. And from a learning standpoint, I don't need your school to learn algebra anymore. I don't need to send my kids to your school to learn French. I don't need to send my kids to your school to learn history. Those things are everywhere now. Now, that doesn't mean I don't want to send my kids to your schools. I absolutely do. I think schools are the most important parts of our communities. I absolutely do. But if the value of school is going to be that content stuff, I think we have trouble in front of us, because that content stuff is now everywhere. And I don't need you to organize that for me any longer. In a learning context, same thing. And that is a big shift, that the power of learning now is in the learner's hands. And that is a huge disruption. And I just love this picture, which is why I show it. But it is a huge disruption. And it is a huge challenge to the thinking that we've had about schools for over 100 years. It shifts the balance of power for learning from the school to the learner, whether we like it or not. And a lot of us don't like it very much. I go to a lot of audiences where I can tell people are going, I've only got 2 years left. Why am I listening to this? Can't I just keep doing what I'm doing because I'm almost done? It's almost over, And, the answer is you can keep doing that, but is that what's best for kids right now? And that's the question. We kind of had this discussion last night, too. Someone said everybody kind of has to take the tests, and we have to do well on the tests, and if we do well on the test, everybody's happy. And I said, is everybody really happy? If you do well on the test, is that really what it's all about? And if it's not what it's all about, then we have to engage in those conversations, whether we like it or not. It's not going to be easy. So I love this quote by Alvin Toffler, who wrote the book Future Shock, who says, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write. It'll be the people who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And I think we have actually some serious unlearning to do right now about what's happening in our schools, a steep unlearning curve, if you will. And I just want to talk a little bit about what that unlearning curve looks like. And then actually, if we have a little bit of time at the end, might do some questions, some Q&A as well. So first thing is, and the most important thing is, we kind of have to relearn this thing that we call learning. And I'm going to give you a little quiz right now. This is one of my favorite authors on the topic of learning. He wrote a book, Seymour Saracen did, called "And What Do You Mean by Learning?" which is a great question, which is a question I ask a lot. So he says, his answer is, productive learning is the learning process which engenders and reinforces, and I've left that blank because I want you to fill in the blank. You talk to one another right now for about a minute and see if you can come up with an answer. What is productive learning in terms of the way you would describe it? So take a minute to just talk about that and see if you can come up with an answer to that. Okay. So there are probably at least half a dozen or 10 answers that could pop into your brains fairly quickly. But I'm interested. What did you think? What did you come up with that you think is maybe different or unique? Anyone come up with something they thought was a little bit different? Okay. Then what were the ones you thought everyone else had? Huh? Learning. Just that reinforces learning. Okay. What else? Anything else? Yep. Huh? Thinking. Great. More questions. Okay. Creativity. Your input. Anyone say higher student achievement? Excitement. Say it one more time. Change. Passion. Self-management. Okay. These are great. And they're pretty much all correct. I love what he says, though. I love the way that he puts this. He says, productive learning is the learning process which engenders and reinforces wanting to learn more. Wanting to learn more. And, this would be, I think, the absolute benchmark, should be the absolute benchmark for our classrooms. Do our kids leave our classrooms wanting to learn more? Now think about that for a second. And here's the thing. In a world of scarcity, I think it's maybe okay to say no. Because there are things in a world of scarcity that kids have to come to us to get. I get that. But in a world of abundance, is it okay if our kids are leaving our classrooms without wanting to learn more? Maybe not every day, but more often than not. And I ask my kids all the time when they come home from school. I'll say, hey, Tess, what were you learning in school today that you want to learn more about? We got this thing. It's called the internet. We can go deep. Let's go, right? And she's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, there's got to be something that, you want to learn more about. Let's go. My kids are learning what we want them to learn. And they don't have a lot of passion around that stuff. They find moments of passion, don't get me wrong, and there are teachers who will inspire them and get them motivated to be interested in it. But in a world of abundance, we want kids who want to learn more, and I love the way that he describes that. So what does that kind of look like? Well, I'm going to give a little bit of a different frame of how we define learning now, or what some of the parameters of learning should be. First of all, learning is connected now. It really is. I'm going to play you this video, and I want you just to listen. It's a little bit hard to hear, But I want you just to listen to the way these first graders are talking about learning in networks, and hopefully this will work.
Use Twitter in our classroom to connect other classes and to help us to learn. Twitter helps us to learn to read and write. We can write about things that happen in our classroom or reply to tweets. At first we read all the tweets together. So we're getting to be better readers. So we couldn't read Twitter ourselves with our iPads. When we first started using Twitter, we wrote all of our tweets together with our class. Now we can tweet ourselves. Sometimes we use hashtags so that all of our tweets can go together with the tweets other kids write. We tweeted secrets about Santa. We like Twitter because it helps us to learn and because it's fun.
Okay, now, first graders using Twitter. And I love that part, we tweeted secrets about Santa, right? Which is great. I know you probably didn't hear, but you got the idea? So this is a first grade class that's basically using Twitter. I'll go back, there we go. And actually you can put that button, thanks. This is Kathy Cassidy in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan up in Canada. And her first grade kids are on Twitter, interacting with the world. Now, this isn't everything she does, obviously. There are many things that she does in the classroom that don't have anything to do with technology or being networked. But a big part of what she does is basically helping her kids understand that there is an audience out there in the world, that there are other people out there that you can interact with around Santa or whatever else, and that's an interesting way to learn how to read and write, even in first grade, because and some of you really would like to have a world audience, others would shy away from having a world audience, and I understand both of those, but audience changes things. Real work for real audiences, for real purposes, absolutely changes things. And the authenticity of what she's doing in many of the things that she uses technology for is pretty impressive. Every one of her kids, you can see on the right-hand side there, every one of her first grade kids has his or her own blog where they are posting pictures, they are posting audio files of themselves reading, and they are getting comments from literally people around the world. And you ask, well, isn't that dangerous? I mean, aren't there people coming in there, Kathy understands how to do this and how to keep her kids safe because she herself is a connected network learner. She has practice around this type of learning. In fact, she's one of my favorite teachers, to be honest with you, in my own life, in talking about primary school uses of these types of technologies. I had actually a presentation I was given to about 100 primary school teachers one day, and they were asking some great questions about this. I'd shown it. And I said, you know what, let me see if I can get Kathy, and maybe she can answer the questions. And sure enough, I went on Skype, and she was online, and I said, hey, would you mind spending 10 minutes with us, if you have a chance? And she said, sure. And so we got the connection going. And when the screen came live from Kathy, there were all her first graders sitting right in front of the camera looking into the screen. And they were like, going, and I didn't realize she was in class. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry to interrupt your class. And she was like, no, this is great. And her first grade kids answered the questions that my primary school teachers had. And it was brilliant. It was just brilliant. But those kids have a different perception of the world. They are developing a very different understanding of the potentials of these networks and these connections that we can have. And networks really are the new classrooms. And I'll use this example again. Look, I want my children to have a network that looks like this. Not necessarily a social network. They don't need my help in terms of developing their social networks around this. But I'm talking about a learning network. And this is a learning network for me. Like I said before, a lot of those dots are strangers. And I'm going to say something as a parent that might make you feel uncomfortable. And in fact, in some ways, I hope it does. I want my children to be found by strangers on the internet. And I'll let that hang there for a second so that you really hear that. The idea that my kids will not be learning with strangers for the rest of their lives is ridiculous. They absolutely will. They are going to be learning with people who they don't know, people who they will never meet. And if we don't give them some sense of what that looks like and how to do that well, then basically we're limiting them. If you told me, and I think I said this before, but I'll just say it again, if you told me I could only learn with people in my face-to-face world, you would be literally cutting off 98% of my learning opportunities right now. And yet we do that to our kids just about every day. We do that to our kids by bringing them into classrooms and saying, no, put that away, we're not going to do that, we can't get outside the classroom. And I know it's difficult, and I know it's in many ways, a lot of work to kind of think about what that looks like, but it's really, really important right now. In the States, we have this group called the MacArthur Foundation, and they've done a lot of work in trying to develop a kind of definition around what this looks like. And what I love about this definition is the part where she says, where a young person is able to pursue a personal interest or passion with the support of friends and caring adults. It is about this self-directed, passion-based learning that is so possible now. And that's what's making it, again, very difficult, I think, for a lot of schools. The kids are learning about the things they care about, and then they're coming into school, and it doesn't quite look the same any longer. And that's becoming more and more of a distinction. Learning is also continual. It's not an event. As much as these types of face-to-face, get-togethers and conferences are still important, it can't end here. It's got to be something that we learn continually. And I ask, on a regular basis, I ask teachers, and audiences, well, how many of you have seen a 3D printer? How many of you know what the maker movement is? How many of you know what MOOCs are? What free, massively open online courses? And, all these types of things that are happening in education, and stunningly few people really understand or know what those things are. And it's because, I think, that we're not in the flow of learning. It's an event still for us. Our professional development is pretty much an event. And what I tell teachers is, you can't wait for school to deliver PD to you any longer, to deliver professional development to you any longer. If you don't know how to use Twitter and you want to learn Twitter, you can't wait for the workshop. Go learn Twitter. Just do it. Have you ever seen a 4-year-old get an iPad? I guarantee if you ever see a kid get an iPad, a young kid, they start playing with it, the first words out of that child's mouth are not, this is great, when's the workshop on how to help me do this, right? They're just like pressing buttons, they figure it out. We have to be more like 4-year-olds when it comes to our own learning, when it comes to our own professional development. If we think we need to upskill, learn new tools, technologies, whatever else, we have to do that. Because guess what? We can self-organize as well. It's not just about kids. You understand that, right? This whole conversation about learning is not just about kids. This is our world, too. And we have huge opportunities here, too, that we can take advantage of. It's pretty cool. So Twitter, yeah. I mean, a lot of people think, well, isn't Twitter where movie stars let you know when they're arrested again and, when they've gotten in trouble? And yeah, it is. But the very cool thing about Twitter for me is I don't follow those people on Twitter. That's not what Twitter is for me. 95% of the people in my network would tell you that Twitter is the #1 professional development tool that they have in their lives. Which when you hear that, if you don't know what Twitter is, you kind of go, that's ridiculous, that's crazy. But it is because you are connected to other people who share your interests and passions with whom you can learn. This is Jane Hart from the UK, who every year does this top 100 learning tools. Twitter's #1. Twitter's the #1 tool in the world, according to about 600 professionals, in terms of their learning. It takes us to get to #8 before we finally hit something that we've kind of, familiar with, PowerPoint, right? That's at least there's something up there that we still know. So this is self-organized learning. It's this ability to use tools in ways that can extend and amplify our own ability to learn. Learning is creative, and I break that up because it is now about making things. It's about creating things, not just creative thinking, but to actually do things creatively. I know, you guys know, who these two guys are, right? This is Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. There's a really bad Steve Jobs movie out in the States right now. If it cuts down here, just don't even bother watching it. But look, this is the first Apple computer, and if it looks like it was made in a basement in a garage, well, that's where pretty much it was. And how many times do you think they failed before they got this thing to work? And that really is what's interesting about what's happening now, especially in the States, but all around the world, is this maker movement. This idea that it's not just enough to have good ideas, but now we've got the tools to begin to actually create and make things, and to prototype them, and to see if they work, like Super Awesome Sylvia. To go out and actually create stuff. And it's becoming a huge thing. I know this is a really long quote, but this is one of my favorite school leaders in the States. Her name is Pam Moran. She's in Virginia. And she says, we must remember that making at its core is about teaching kids to view the world in a completely different way. Completely different way. That it's not just answering questions on a handout or a worksheet, or it's not just doing a project that 1,000 other people have already done, but it's about making something new, making something for an authentic audience, making something that has purpose and something that lives in the world and, at best case, changes the world for the better. Absolutely. Kids can change the world for the better. And if the work that we're having them do in schools is simply passing paper back and forth, whether that paper is analog or digital, we're missing the point. This is a huge opportunity for kids to do really good work. So I'll give you one quick example. This is a 5-year-old's rendering of something that she felt was just absolutely imperative to have in her life. Anyone want to guess what it is? And if you were there last night, you can't answer. Huh? Nunchuck? No. A toilet? No. No. Although, yeah, I guess from the top you could kind of say, yeah. No, this is a toothbrush holder. Okay, now, the deal is she has a little brother who keeps brushing his teeth and then putting his toothbrush on top of hers, and she had just had it, and she went to her dad and she said, I need this. I can't take his cootie germs any longer. Please, can you help me get a toothbrush holder? So her dad actually had a little bit of tech sense, a little wherewithal, and he, on a 3D printer, was able to print this out for her. So now she has her own pink toothbrush holder that she has on her little bathroom sink. Now, I know she didn't actually make it, but imagine a 5-year-old understanding, I can draw something and then make it happen, create it. And if you don't think that that's important, well, MIT, maybe the most prestigious university in America, if not, certainly one of the most prestigious around the world, came out 2 weeks ago and said, in our application now, we're going to have a certain place for kids who are makers, for kids who are creating things. We want to know what you've created that has had an impact or has changed the world or just been creative or whatever else. And they are not going to be the last. There are going to be more and more people who are going to be looking at these technologies that we have, the connections that we have, and saying, well, what have you done with that? Yeah, you got great grades. That's great. You did well on the test. But what have you done with what you know? What have you created? What have you made that's made a difference? Because that is within the grasp of every child in our schools right now, and every person in this room, by the way, as well. Self-organized learning, by the way, is real learning, too. There are a lot of people now that are saying, why shouldn't we get credit for the informal learning that we do online? Why do we have to sit in a university or sit in a particular place? There's a huge kind of rollout now around badges. I don't know if you've heard the Mozilla Foundation basically wants to give you a badge if you have expertise in something and you can show that expertise. Why not, if you've learned it outside of the traditional settings? So we have Khan Academy, right? And I know many of you know Khan. And Khan is a disruptive kind of thing for schools because basically, if I want to learn algebra, I can basically go here. I love this idea. I think it's interesting what Khan says, by the way. Obviously, millions of people around the world are using this. But I think it's interesting the way that he phrases what's possible here. He says, learn almost anything for free. And then the mission of Khan Academy is to deliver a free, world-class education for anyone, anywhere. Now, in order to understand whether or not he's right or not, we have to define world-class education. And we could have a pretty interesting conversation around what that is. I'll give you the short answer in the States right now. We just have to beat Finland. That's it. If we can just beat Finland, whatever it takes, we're going to beat Finland. But seriously, what if he's right? What if he's right? What if you can get a world-class education by going to Khan Academy or other places? Well, here he is. He's kind of building this out, and he's got a very interesting kind of structure for this. So you watch the videos, you take the quizzes, and now you get badges. And you get the algebra badge, you get the French badge, you get the chemistry badge, whatever it is. And I don't think it's ridiculous to suggest that in the next few years, someone's going to go to someone and say, you've got 25 badges from Khan Academy, you're educated. Now, that's what he thinks, a free, world-class education for anyone, anywhere. Now, I think that's an interesting thing, but the larger message here is a lot of the informal, self-organized learning that we can do deserves credit, deserves some type of, whatever, if it's a certificate or a badge or whatever. Why not? In a world of abundance, if we're only saying that what's valuable to learn is what you can learn in an institution, that's the only thing that matters, that's a problem. That's a problem right now. So there are more and more people out there right now who are saying, here are all different ways that we can recognize the learning you're doing on your own. Gaming is now another one, too. And in the States, you may not have heard, there's this initiative called the Common Core. And the Common Core initiative is basically now 45 states have adopted these standards. And it's not a national curriculum per se, but it's a national curriculum, if you know what I mean. And so now everybody is just slapping Common Core on whatever they've made, and there's lots of money to be made in terms of developing these types of ideas. But gaming environments are huge right now. And you want to talk about apps? I don't know if you've heard of DragonBox, but DragonBox, they now have 2 versions, 1 through 6, 7 through 12. This is basically an algebra game. You can put first graders in there, and it teaches them very basics about algebra. So you take something away from this side, you got to take something away from this side. You add it to this side, you got to add it to this side. And I love this quote. What does a middle school algebra teacher do if kindergartners can start learning to solve equations within a couple of hours? Why do we have to wait until 7th grade to learn algebra, or whenever it is, 8th grade, whatever else? Who says? Who made up that rule? I don't know who made up that rule, but I think they made up that rule for a world of scarcity, for a world that said, yeah, we have to kind of really plan this out and do it that way. So I want you to imagine now that this is everything there is to know using the access that you have in your pockets right now. This is the library at Stuttgart, by the way. But just imagine that this is everything possible to know, every piece of content that's available to you on the web. If that's everything there is to know, welcome to school. Now, I know we've always had to make choices. We've always had to make choices about what to teach in schools. It's not like before the web there wasn't a lot of stuff, a lot of information, a lot of knowledge out there. But the web has really changed it now because it's made it accessible. That whole idea of abundance has really changed it. But here's the thing. Now you add the people on top of this. You add the people on Twitter, you add your people on Facebook, YouTube, all these different kinds of social connections, these 5 billion potential teachers that are coming online in the next few years, and now welcome to school. Now, please hear me say this. Please hear me say this. There is huge value in that dot. There is huge value in that dot. But it's a different value. It's a different value now. And actually, it's the value that Guy was talking about in large measure. It's the idea that it's not so much about the content and the information as it is the mindsets and the dispositions and the literacies that kids take with them that will allow them to flourish in this world of abundance. And that dot is extremely important to my children right now, and it's not serving them really well in that respect. It's not. It still is about that content piece. So if that's what our students have access to, we have to ask this very difficult question. What is our new role? And that's the question I was trying to ask. Here's the self-serving moment of the presentation, but that's the question I tried to ask in this TED book. And the short answer here is, it's all the stuff that we can't wrap up in a 12-minute video. Because if you're placing your value on the stuff that you can put into a 12 to 15-minute video and put it up online, that stuff is everywhere. That stuff is not unique, and you're probably not going to be the best person doing it, to be honest with you, when you have so many other people who are there. So, if you think the world has changed now, what do you think it's going to be like for the kids who are first graders and kindergartners in your schools right now? Imagine the types of technologies, the types of networks, the types of connections, the access to knowledge, content, people that they're going to have as they go into adulthood 12 years from now. Even 10 years, even 2 years from now. We can't imagine it. We can't imagine it. But what we do know is it's not going away. That abundance is not going to go away. It's going to grow. And that does require different mindsets, different skills, different literacies for our kids to be successful. So we need to ask some really hard questions right now. We need to ask, how does our thinking around what every student needs to know change in a world where everything is available to be known at a couple clicks or a couple connections? What are those skills and literacies and dispositions? What are those ones? And Guy talked a lot about them this morning. But what are those things that are now fundamentally important to flourish in a world where we have access to so much stuff? And they are absolutely different. If you think that the literacies that sustained us in the 20th century are going to sustain us moving forward, think again. They are very, very different. How do our responsibilities as individual learners change because of this? And finally, how does our vision for teaching and learning change in a world of abundance? And here's another part of my life that I find stunning when I ask educators, what is your vision for teaching and learning with technology? What does it look like? I asked that actually about a month ago to a superintendent in Indiana whose entire high school had just gotten iPads. Every student in the school got an iPad. And I said to him, so what's changed? What's different now? Now that you have access, now that you have connections, now that you have abundance at your fingertips. I didn't say all that, but that's what I was asking. What's changed? And he said, well, we can now give more advanced placement courses. And I said, that's great. And I moved on. Because that's basically saying now I can create really good digital worksheets and just pass them back and forth in a different way. So where is our vision around this? Now, our vision is difficult, though. This is the hardest part. And the vision is difficult because our own practice, and this is what I said at the beginning. How do we create vision around what happens in classrooms if our personal practice can't inform that in ways that are meaningful for kids? You know what I'm saying, right? So unless we begin to ask of ourselves, how are we using computers to solve problems, to create things, to make authentic work for real audiences that live in the world and maybe change the world for better? How are we as individual teachers and educators and people doing that? And how are we connecting to other people who share our passions, with whom we can learn in ways that didn't exist even 10 years ago, and who knows what it's going to be like 5 years from now? How are we doing that? Because unless we do it, how can we make sense of it for our kids? Now, I get it. Kids know more than we do about technology. They absolutely do. I hear this all the time. I learn all this stuff from my kids. And you do, and we do. But you guys are the learning experts in your kids' lives, not the technology experts. No one's expecting you to be the technology experts, but you are the learning experts in your kids' lives. Kids need you to make sense of what they can do with computers in a learning context, and to be able to model that, and to be able to show that, and to nurture that, and support that. So how can I become more connected? How can I create things? And how can I model learning in some different ways? So I set this up as an either or, and I had this slide in before Guy's talk this morning. I swear I did. It's not an either or. It's both. He's absolutely right. The conversation right now is, how do we do both of these things? How do we make all of the people who expect traditional learning, the Ministry of Education, the parents that send their kids to our schools, who have this traditional context, how do we keep them happy? But how at the same time do we change what happens in our classrooms to make sure that our kids are learners and are learning in ways that will sustain them in their lives? And we have to do both. And that's why schools have to be really different, not just better, because you know what? Better means little if what people need and want is something else. And my kids want something else, and they also need something else. And that's where our expertise comes in right now. Starts with us. I hope for you that you would be learners first and teachers second. That you would see yourselves as people who are just taking advantage of everything that is possible right now, all the opportunities that you have, bringing those things into your own practice so that you can inform your classrooms and inform the conversations with your kids. And what if professional development looked less like this? Oh, the irony of this picture, right? And what if professional development looked more, like this, or more like this?
So there's one. So there's one.
So that's a loop of a teacher who took 3 days to create this shirt, that when he presses a button on the shirt, the computer shows the digestive system and where it's working. Now, you look at that and you kind of go, well, that's kind of silly. But do you know how much he learned in the process of creating that? How many times he failed? How many times he had to go back and learn it again and try it again? And he made something and understood something differently about the world because of that. So I'll leave you with this quote. In times of change, learners will inherit the earth, while the learned will find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. I hope that you are learners. I ask that you develop your kids as learners, because not only is the world literally at our fingertips, But for all of us, our kids, and for you as well, this is the most amazing time to be a learner ever, and we need to take advantage of that and figure that out for our children. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, thank you. To talk, to think, to discuss now at coffee time. But before that, you will have to start tuned in because our next session after coffee is Designing Schools Inside Out with Hamish Boyd, who has nicely heard all of the presentations along the day. And what is fantastic is to see the keynote speakers listening to themselves and piling up all the concepts. So I really appreciate that, and thank you so much, because what you're doing is interconnecting all your ideas. But the moment comes after Hamish's presentation that you will have to decide on the first two semi-plenaries. One will be taking place here, and another one in the Catalina's room. So please check your options. There you're going to see the places. And I must apologize because the abstract for Karen Morrison's presentation on scientific, the development of scientific processes and the language, scientific language developed in a primary science lesson is not correct. So if you go to our conference webpage that you can get at the cover of this, you're going to see the correct abstract. It's not science and Shakespeare. I wouldn't like you to have a confused idea of the presentation. It's how you build process skills and scientific vocabulary in the primary science lesson. Yes? See you in 30 minutes. Thank you.